coordinated entry providers are saying that, their biggest influx is the 55 and over on a fixed income, and, even saying we are not a geriatric system, yet the biggest influx is seniors. And they also said coordinated entry isn't designed to serve elders and not specialized in making those care decisions. So they're saying they need solutions for folks who are 55 plus who are now becoming homeless.
Hi friends, this is Carrie Morrison. Welcome back to Heartforward, Conversations from the Heart. This week, we will return to the studio to complete the conversation with Aimery Thomas and Leila Towry from the Future Organization. As we described last week, their research firm was sponsored by Brilliant Corners and funded by the California Community Foundation and Cedars Sinai as part of an initiative involving the participation of the LA County Department of Mental Health, the LA County Department of Health Services, and Genesis LA, with the intention to draw attention to the issues affecting licensed residential facilities that care for people with serious mental illness in our communities. If you did not have a chance to listen to part one of this conversation, I would encourage you to do so as we unpack the significant findings of their research in that conversation. In this concluding episode, we will connect the dots between our crisis of homelessness and the precarious state of our system of adult residential facilities. And as you will learn, we are going to practice moving away from the label of board and care homes and gravitate toward terminology of licensed adult residential facilities, which includes two types of housing, ARFs and RCFEs, otherwise known as adult residential facilities, and residential care facilities for the elderly. Well, welcome back, Aimery and Leila, for the second part of this conversation that we started last time on this report that you were commissioned to write, the Serving Our Vulnerable Populations, Los Angeles County Adult Residential Facilities and Residential Care Facilities for the Elderly. As I expected, there was so much for us to talk about that it could not do it justice in just one conversation. So thank you for being willing to come back, and we're going to finish it, and we're also going to unpack some of the recommendations that you have. Hopefully will stimulate our listeners to begin thinking about how they can better either inform themselves or advocate for some of the ideas that you want to posit.
Thanks again.
Yeah.
That's great.
Thanks for being here again. So the last time we were finishing up the different subcategories of your research, and the last one that we left on the table, which is super important just in terms of the crisis that we see on the streets, not only in our county, but the state, is how is it that we make a better connection between this market of adult residential facilities and residential care facilities for the elderly? So we're using our nomenclature again, ARFs and RCFEs. How do we make this connection to actually being a viable resource in the broad spectrum of housing that would help to address homelessness? And you started to assert in the last conversation that there's a lack of awareness of the market users, policymakers, as to how critical this resource is, and maybe even not a full understanding of how many people have arrived at one of these facilities having had experience of homelessness, either directly or indirectly. Can you talk a little bit about what your research found about the history of where residents came from?
There's this notion of sort of direct placements from experiencing homelessness and indirect placements of people experiencing homelessness. So when an individual experiencing homelessness, is encountered by our continuums of care and our systems of care in a street or an interim housing situation, oftentimes they're at a point of crisis. They might have a mental health crisis, they might have medical needs or a medical crisis, or they might have an interaction with law enforcement, or it might be a justice involvement. So there's a lot of different pathways by which individuals can move through these various points of systems and then eventually find themselves in an ARF or an RCFE even. And it's actually really difficult to track that. What we found is that, for the individuals that had believed that they had come through direct to the ARF or RCFE from homelessness, which is about 10.6% of our sample of about 625 individuals, we discovered that most of them had made many different sort of steps, and it wasn't actually they had moved directly from experiencing homelessness on the street or interim housing, but they had multiple steps through medical facilities. They had multiple, sometimes justice involvement, sometimes mental health facilities or mental health intervention. And that's what makes it really difficult to understand about the real impacts of individuals who have these experiences in ARFs and RCFEs, is because definitionally, it's really hard to say, what's a direct move versus indirect move. And that's not really, the truth is more organic. And when we actually looked at it, our estimate was that as many as 35% of individuals housed, especially on the ARF side, it's probably closer to 50%, had come through from experience of homelessness.
Do you think the federal government commitment to the notion of housing first has perhaps, housing first was defined, 15 years ago when conditions are much different than they are right now. There is, I think, this opportunity with the adult residential facility, for example, to provide housing plus a significant amount of treatment, which is necessary in order to maybe eventually live independently in housing. What are your thoughts about that, Leila?
Housing first comes from the philosophy on harm reduction, right? Versus you have, I guess, before housing first, it was you need to abstain, you need to be sober, and then you can get a voucher, right? So in terms of housing first, the idea of bringing people indoors and, meeting that criteria of you're housed now and you've removed the stresses of the street so that you can go through a recovery process is a great idea and important. What's missing is how we define housing. And so we've already talked about in part one that residential care is not housing. There's no lease agreement. There are house rules, but there's no lease agreement or tenancy rights. So yes, there's an opportunity to bring board and licensed residential facilities into the continuum of care as a step through. And, that's defined by, what kind of services should an individual engage in? What do they want to participate in? Everybody has their own unique treatment plan, right? But having those resources available as they are in permanent supportive housing across the board, because I think we saw a lot of service variation in licensed facilities in terms of how service rich or are they meeting the minimum criteria for licensing or doing more? Do they have a connection with an outpatient program? Or do they have a connection with FSP? And so we saw a wide range of opportunities there. Just bringing it back to housing first, absolutely, there are individuals that may require this pathway, especially if they're of a certain age or, have complex health conditions that may prevent them from moving forward into an independent setting, and others that should move into an independent setting.
When your report was first released a month ago, one of the salient, I really think the LA Times could have done a deeper dive into the rich data that you presented, but
they have a lot of news to report on every day.
Yes, yeah, that's why we're doing this two-part interview. But one of the big sound bites was the fact that you had identified 6,400 unoccupied beds, particularly within RCFE facilities. And so, as we're talking about the link between situation on the street, how many people who are the homeless population is growing older, and we have all these vacant beds, that actually was a stunning finding.
Yeah, especially when you put that in the context of the 2023 point-in-time count captured by LAHSA, you look at state-level data from across California. Our population of people experiencing homelessness, both in the county and the state, is aging. Just like our, the face of our state, our country, globally, we're an aging population. And we really have to create linkages in terms of our continuums of care and our systems of housing and service to really address, the growth of people of age. And in particular, ARFs and RCFEs are going to play an increasingly important role in serving individuals, with from various vulnerable populations, especially those who have experience of homelessness. Because to be frank, it can happen to any of us. Any of us can have one wrong move, one bad turn, one miss of the social safety net, and we find ourselves in need of a little help. And this is a really important aspect in terms of understanding, how tenuous and close we are in this society to having some of these needs ourselves. But definitely in terms of those 6,400 beds, what would it take to activate those beds? Well, we don't have to build anything. And that's really the key point, is activating these 6,400 beds. And we know it's highly probable that the population of individuals experiencing homelessness over the age of 60 right now, that would be a perfect match. It'd cut that population nearly in half in Los Angeles County. Activating those beds, we don't have to acquire property. We merely need to pay for the services. And that's a highly efficient way for government. We always say buy, build, or borrow with government. Well, this is a chance for us to borrow from these facilities until we can effectively reduce this crisis, or build enough units to address needs in other ways.
And that's the opportunity. Coordinated entry providers are saying that, their biggest influx is the 55 and over on a fixed income, and, even saying we are not a geriatric system, yet the biggest influx is seniors. And they also said coordinated entry isn't designed to serve elders and not specialized in making those care decisions. So they're saying they need solutions for folks who are 55 plus who are now becoming homeless, and they shouldn't have to choose between a home or being and maintaining their medication.
Yeah, critical issue on the horizon, which I think we'll touch upon again in the recommendations that we're going to talk about. The last thing before we move into the recommendations is that we're not going to take time to talk about it in this conversation, but certainly am driving people to the chapter in your report about the econometric analysis that you did that actually documents the significant cost of, servicing people while they're homeless on our streets and our communities compared to the relative costs of housing people in licensed facilities. Do you want to share just a couple of sound bites that will intrigue people enough to open this report up?
Well, it's really interesting, the amount of funding, that serving an individual experiencing homelessness. And again, we're talking about your average individual, or the most mean or median individual experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles. Not every homeless individual will be hospitalized. Not every homeless individual or individual experiencing homelessness will have a justice involvement. But in terms of our total costs, and we're talking about our costs from the 88 cities in LA County, the county, all costs considered, we're talking about cost savings of between housing someone in an ARF or RCFE versus serving people, living without a home. It's a cost savings of more than $13,000 per individual per year. And that really speaks a lot also to what we're willing to pay, to deal with a situation or to deal with the needs of people at the street level versus what we're actually paying these facilities, which are stabilizing individuals and providing better care outcomes. But that's the most important finding that I think we have to share, is that the taxpayers of LA County could be better served by funding ARFs and RCFEs at more appropriate levels, rather than continuing to fund, at a very high level, these, these services are going to continue invariably to be delivered on the street. But the fact that it's $13,000 difference that we're willing to pay on the street versus in these facilities is
and we have a county homelessness population of about 70,000 people on any given night.
Yeah, 70,000+. And, of course, that increased recently according to LOS's 2023 point-in-time count. I think it increased by almost 10%.
So let's move into the recommendations. And in your report, you have over 50, so we're not even going to take one a minute. I pulled out 10. And hopefully these are the 10 that you would like to share, and we certainly can modify one of these. But let's start, first of all, with you reference the importance of raising awareness on the part of elected officials, local, municipal, county, state. I would even argue our congressional representatives, because of how so many things are tied to Medicaid and other federal and Social Security. So let's add federal officials
We can definitely agree to that.
Okay. So you indicate, quote, that this much of what is shared in this report has to be absorbed and taken seriously by elected officials. Otherwise, we run the risk by not propping up, and not just propping up, but actually investing in this system which is pretty fragile and fragmented right now. We run the risk of actually exacerbating our homelessness crisis. I would say this. I know you may not say this, but every elected official should pledge to ensure no loss of any bed within their district or jurisdiction, and that I would encourage every elected official to go visit at least 2 licensed facilities in their district, just to understand and see what is at stake and who's operating these places and who lives there. But how strongly do you feel about the urgency of this? This
is the paramount call, or the clarion call, out of our recommendations. We need the active awareness and participation of our elected officials to lead public policy debates and to direct funding to sustain, expand, maximally utilize these facilities which already exist, these housing resources, these care resources, these highly successful mechanisms by which we can serve individuals living with mental illness, with experience of homelessness, and a variety of other care needs that already exist in our communities. They need to make the public aware, because the public tends to follow what our elected officials are talking about. Our elected officials have press conference. Our elected officials direct funding. Our elected officials have the power to change laws, minds, and hearts. And paramount to anything else, we've heard a lot of discussion about the construction of new units in PSH. And again, this is where we have to be careful as researchers. But having conducted this research, and also coming from a public policy background myself, not hearing this housing resource, this care resource, on the lips of many legislators and many elected officials across the state, the county, our cities, it's really critical. And then we hear from the owner and operators that they don't feel like they're heard, or that they're seen. They're not heard and seen because we talk about these other resources that are being utilized to address the crisis of homelessness. But it's really critically important that from the state level to the local community block level, that all agencies, all elected officials, and I don't want to say that there aren't individuals and there aren't elected bodies that are addressing this. I mean, we hear a lot from the LA County Board of Supervisors specifically about what can we do, to aid board and care and / ARF RCFE facilities. But I wonder why we haven't heard about this from other cities within the county, and why we haven't heard about this from our elected officials at the state level directly. We hear about it from state agencies, but we don't hear about it from, for example, our most important elected officials, without naming any names.
I think that if elected officials had the experience of visiting an ARF or RCFE in their own jurisdiction and community, it would be readily apparent what the need and opportunity is.
It doesn't take much to unveil that.
Especially when you compare what they're going to see there to what the nice PSH buildings look like in serving the same population. There's a huge disparity.
So the second recommendation you had, it just follows along on this one. You said, quote, leadership and bravery are required to integrate ARFs and RCFEs into public policy discussions. Are you suggesting that is because there's no natural constituency asking for these improvements?
Well, it's difficult to ask for what you're otherwise unaware of. And in the political calculus of an elected official, if there's no clarion call, if there's no urgency, if there's no burning platform, if it ain't broke, well, why fix it? The focus, again, like I noted previously, the focus is on building new independent units. And I think I mentioned in our last session that there's a certain bias against congregate facilities. There are some antiquated notions. There's a lack of perception of the capability of what these facilities could become, or perhaps what they should become with best practices and better funding. And that's really, our best recommendation is, somebody has to take the lead here to inform the public and inform the policy debate across government to really integrate this with all the needs that we have.
So a third recommendation you made relative to the pantheon of local governments and elected officials is that indeed more funding is required to sustain and increase service capacity from ARFs and RCFEs serving the needs of individuals and providing transitional and permanent housing for vulnerable individuals, and that this market is in direct competition with funds that are typically allocated for the development and creation of permanent supportive housing. I will note that in the next few years, we have two really important funding streams that are going to be up for grabs again. Measure H in the county provided a 1/4 cent sales tax increase, and that will be back on the ballot again in I think 4 years. Potentially, we make a run at ensuring some of that money is earmarked for this population. And in the city of LA, Triple H was a bond measure to provide $1 billion for permanent supportive housing. So is this kind of what you're thinking about, is beginning to position in the minds of those who would be crafting these fiscal measures, there's got to be room at the table for this type of housing?
Absolutely. I think that if more folks are aware of the opportunity and this missing area and the continuum, that it would make sense to, affordable and permanent supportive housing providers who could potentially interface and have a resource for individuals who are evicted or not placed appropriately. Those funding streams have enabled the construction of thousands and thousands of units. And I'd argue there's enough money to go around. But the stakeholders need to come to the table and understand the opportunity to support our existing infrastructure of licensed facilities and to build upon them, because we won't have sort of the red tape restriction of the HUD-funded development. Further, training everyone in the system to get them to understand what these are as a resource. How do you work with them? Who needs to go there? How are we triaging and assessing individuals in terms of their service plan and housing navigation so that we can effectively use the beds?
Back when I did public administration at USC, one of my favorite professors told me about the 7-10 rule. He's a great guy, the city manager of Burbank, and he's a brilliant dude. 7-10 rule is that, you have 7% interest, run it out over 10 years, you double your investment, or the 10-7 rule inversely. So we have an increase of people experiencing homelessness in LA County, 10% per annum. That means we're going to double the population under 7 years. We need a larger scale, greater mass effect solutions than the rate at which we can build or acquire individual units. And we need to be innovative, and we need to think laterally in terms of how can we, are we leaving money on the table? Are we leaving lives unassisted, unaided? And, for me, it's an ethical and moral calling that we had to include these recommendations in this report. And, we know that the report's onerous and it's a lot to read and it's a lot of detail, but we created these specifically in the hopes that, the people that are the decision makers and the people that are members of the public and the people that really want to see change, that they can put change to field. And we do need congregate facilities to be able to address our burgeoning multiplicative needs to address just the sheer numbers of individuals experiencing homelessness right now. It just increases every day.
So that's a great segue to your fourth recommendation that I picked out. You point out that we need to view ARFs and RCFEs as a genuine housing resource, and the federal government's view of what constitutes housing is antiquated. I will say that yesterday I was actually at an event where Mayor Bass spoke at the eBell, and she said that a short-sighted view of HUD is that they think of housing only as permanent supportive housing. And so, and she actually, I think, agrees with your definition that this is antiquated, and that she specifically said that there needs to be an openness to policy change. Now, in yesterday's
We'd love to have a conversation with her about this.
She was speaking about the need for interim housing, because the federal government has stopped funding it. But I think there's openness, and she's had room. She's had time in Washington to make these connections. Do you think it's possible we can get the federal government to change their definition of housing?
I think that it would take a little bit of time. I know that, federal government agencies tend to move in very slow and broad policy cycles, and that's only when they have a stable party in charge of the federal government. I think it's really difficult to get, it's like trying to make a cruise ship to turn around, or aircraft carrier to turn around. It takes, these big wide turns. It takes forever to, get it head in the opposite direction. And maybe HUD doesn't need to head in the opposite direction. Maybe they just need some minor policy change to relent and allow a little bit of light in, a little bit of innovation in from the side. But it's a structural problem. But we can't entirely blame HUD, because at the local level, in terms of, regardless of where we fund our resources, in the policy discussions, in our planning, in our integration of services, we can certainly do more without necessarily having to change the federal government.
Okay, that gives us some hope.
Yeah, I think we're already spending the money inefficiently, right? we're spending it when people go from one system to another, and those, medical bills rack up, or, the justice involvement, all of those expenses. So it's about getting the alignment and avoiding all that transfer and churn in the system and putting it where it needs to go. So what does our population need? How old are they? How many are flowing through CES that have co-occurring, comorbidities or health disparities or whatever it is?
Even within the market, we have circular service flows where individuals are placed by system users at various ARFs and RCFEs that may not be ideal for their individual needs. Therefore, they find themselves transferred to another ARF or RCFE, or yet another ARF or RCFE. And this is where a lot of this integration and innovation and, having the participation of, state agencies all the way down to local and continuums of care system users, getting the right information about the capabilities of every facility, out there, to the people that need it, and placing individuals correctly the first time with the facility that best suits their needs is a way to really massively increase our utilization. So we're talking about 20% of individuals that leave ARFs or RCFEs, they go to another one. And, when it's 1 out of 5, that definitely points to a lot of prospective inefficiency. And largely that's about getting placements right the first time and making sure individuals have access to wraparound services that meet their needs.
So we're reading each other's mind, because the fifth recommendation that I pulled was this, that you suggest the need for a centralized public navigation service or function for ARFs and RCFEs to ensure that vacant beds are not only maximally utilized, but also that you say that people are in the right place where they need to be for the services they need. So I think you've made the case as to why this is important. What could that look like, and who would actually do that?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily want to recommend. We have several county agencies that can effectively act as air traffic control, because they're already very much engaged, with networks of facilities and whatnot, and they provide enhanced and enriched funding to sustain and enhance the care and outcomes for broad segments of these populations. I suppose it's just a good footnote to indicate that this wouldn't just be for public agencies, but that if a public agency were to step into this role, that they would do so for all players within the market, or all system users, so that we would make sure that we really maximize this resource in a comprehensive 360, 720 degree fashion. And that would be a very invaluable service to not just sustain our current facilities, but also to promote market entrance, more owners and operators to consider entering the market, especially if they can guarantee that they'll have placements for their beds that are, and there are existing programs. I know that DMH and DHS, and I believe also DPH, have programs where they are placing individuals. But again, the integration of all of these disparate channels and all these points of entry. We have uncontrolled, entry from so many different players within the market. We have hospitals that have individual relationships with facilities. And what we really need to do is to share information and to cooperate and collaborate and to make sure that we're placing individuals with specific needs in the facilities that serve them the best.
The air traffic controller, that makes a lot of sense. A sixth recommendation you made, and this actually surprised me. I didn't realize this. You mentioned that there are ownership groups who have multiple facilities. I hadn't quite realized that. And that in some cases, there may be situations where they are actually moving people who come from a neighboring county into Los Angeles County. Now, I'm not trying to be a NIMBY, but by the same token, we do have
God
the
forbid.
largest homelessness crisis in the country. And so...
Well, it's not really being helped by Texas or Florida right now, is it?
No, it's not. It's not. So what are you trying to point us toward with respect to how jurisdictions are operating independent of each other or not taking their fair share?
Yeah, I think the opportunity there is for each jurisdiction to understand the needs of its local population and bring in resources to serve those individuals rather than, okay, LA County has a lot of these facilities, so let's just put them there and hope for the best. So that's not contributing to, the state addressing its homelessness crisis. So, working on a local level, regional level, what are the assets and services available? And if they're not there, build them. I don't want to mention any particular county, but, we have a similar issue with affordable housing development and rent control and what do they call it when you have a certain percentage of your housing inventory is affordable, right? And your new construction is affordable. Inclusionary zoning, exactly. So, it kind of mirrors that, except it's more on a one-to-one, it's that dumping, which goes back a long way.
I mean, really, it's a matter of procedural fairness. The idea that every jurisdiction or county is doing what they can to serve the population that they so rightfully should be serving.
So just as a side question, this realization that I did not previously have with respect to ownership groups owning multiple facilities. I'm just a side question. Is this perhaps a positive trend because economies of scale can be achieved if you maybe operate, 3, 5, 6 facilities?
I mean, just to speak to the market of the market in general, it can be a very positive thing. For a smaller owner and operator, if they have more than one facility, it gives them a greater sense of financial stability, but also increases the complexity of services that they have to deliver for a larger population, potentially across multiple locations. The economies of scale, certainly there's argument there. I mean, at the very top end of the market now, you have, with RCFEs, you have real estate investment trusts, which are publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange. I'm not sure, I'm not going to characterize those as either being good nor bad, because those types of facilities principally serve, people with luxury or private care needs that are not the segment of the market that we're really focused on here. But certainly for a number of reasons, if we have successful owners and operators and they're capable of operating more than one facility, then by all means, we should be supporting them and encouraging them to do so, because we could use more facilities and more beds.
It seems like a promising trend if we're going to try to find more entrants into this market.
Yeah.
So a seventh recommendation you made with respect to the role of local municipalities, you point out that cities have the responsibility for land use and planning and zoning. And you've got a number of recommendations in this space, but two in particular I pulled. There's an importance. It's an important need to educate communities to reduce the fear and stigma associated with locating licensed facilities in. We don't want them to go into commercial zones or, off the side of the freeway, but actually into neighborhoods so people can walk to the library, go to the post office, walk to the store, so that's important. And then also, if we are going to try to expand the inventory of facilities, that there needs to be a better responsiveness from local municipalities on the zoning, the planning, the entitlement processes for these facilities.
Absolutely. I mean, cities need to understand how important and vital facilities are in serving a proportion of their communities. And we heard a lot around, red tape and just long processes and, stacking fees. And so that's where cities can really play a role in supporting facilities and being able to do their best work and in supporting the vulnerable populations. And further, just, not sort of having them be out on an island where people don't understand who they serve or what they do. I see the opportunity as their hubs, their community hubs. There are a lot of neighborhoods, low-income neighborhoods, high crime. There's a lot more that can be done to level the playing field and create more, two-way, three-way communication between local jurisdiction, operators, law enforcement, zoning, planning, and the operators and residents of facilities. So in terms of community improvement projects and greening and litter abatement and service projects and linkage. I met somebody, a local in our city's library system, who said they were reaching out to local adult residential facilities to engage them in literacy programs and reading programs. And I thought, wow, never heard that before.
Right.
Thank you.
And this is where like local city
someplace
council,
free to go.
City council people who might say, we have nothing to do as the city with mental health treatment or whatever, but they do have the ability to help locate facilities in their districts. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think it goes to a larger issue of the stigmatization of mental illness and people's trepidation, the general community at large's trepidation with being with that population, understanding, it doesn't exist in our family, so it doesn't exist at all. It's those people. And so I think that's where we have a lot of work to do in our system. Because if we don't address that, we're going to continue to have the NIMBYism. And, I would much rather have a licensed facility in my community or down the street than, trip over 10 unhoused individuals on the sidewalk in 110-degree weather.
Yes.
And that's really the sad thing is a lot of municipalities, in prohibiting the expansion or the creation of these facilities, effectively they're cutting off their nose to spite their face. Because if you don't have a way to integrate these facilities into your community, then you have nothing, and you're only really adding to the issue of, vulnerable individuals not getting what they need from your community, and really, almost effectively reducing, the quality of life for everybody in your community.
Well said. The eighth recommendation that I pulled out, 8 and 9, relate to something actually that we haven't really talked too much about, which is the community care licensing division. Maybe first, can you just describe what that is? So
the community care licensing division, part of the California Department of Social Services, is the division within that department that provides licensing and regulation for all of these facilities. They have regional teams of, staff who go out and inspect facilities. They investigate claims. They create the rules and the operating, the best practice procedures and whatnot. They maintain a system of education, where they have continuing education credits for individual certifications. And all of this is, very well intended, and it's very well designed to protect the individuals within congregate facilities in our communities.
So, okay, and I have heard varying degrees of anxiety provoked by an inspector showing up to a board and care RCFE looking for violations. So it kind of runs the gamut of people who can be very helpful and supportive to those who have a more punitive mindset.
One of the things that we found, from our research, and this was a surprising finding. Anecdotally, we had heard from a number of ARF and RCFE operators and owners in the past that they had experienced difficulties, with CCLD, or they had thought that they were too hard. But we actually found that, the majority of owners and operators were surprisingly pleased with the level of services that they had received, from CCLD, and they actually rated their satisfaction with the agency's performance in regulating them as relatively high. That being said, in terms of when we asked them about what they would like to see improved, they noted that there is a certain inconsistency in some of the staff performance in terms of how they went about their roles, and that some staff were perceived as adversarial in comparison to other staff, or that owners and operators who even own facilities and operate facilities in different CCLD regions reported different experiences with CCLD across those regions. So, our findings in the report, we hope, that CCLD will consider that and really also focus on, the cultural approach of how their staff are are conducting these inspections, because certainly it's really important to conduct these things without any appearance of procedural bias. But like I said, I mean, from our research, it indicates that overall, most owners and operators are genuinely satisfied with CCLD, and they believe they're being treated fairly.
So you recommend that there be a reconsideration of the mission of CCLD to actually help us grow and preserve and uplift these facilities. Would that that's not really what they're perceived to be doing right now. That's not their role.
I would say that certainly we've seen some evolution of CCLD, but in terms of when we think about market regulators or regulatory agencies, either at the state or federal level, oftentimes those regulatory agencies also move over into promotion of a particular industry as well. And it's a difficult duty. And if that duty doesn't rest with CCLD, then perhaps there's a need for another agency or perhaps another division of the Department of Social Services or another state agency to be created to assist this market. But then there's one other thing that is very valuable, and that's that there needs to be some thinking at the state level about, what sort of incentives or capabilities can the state provide to owners and operators. I mean, can they reduce their licensure fees, especially for the facilities that are serving individuals relying almost solely on public benefit? Why should that facility pay a comparable license fee to a facility that serves a private or luxury resident population? There are different profit potentials and different capabilities. I mean, for the operators or owners that are principally serving individuals relying on public benefit, what are the other business incentives that we can connect them to and make it easy, ease of doing business? I mean, these individuals, who own these, facilities, they talk a lot about having difficulties obtaining insurance. Is there anything that the insurance commissioner could be doing? Is there anything that the small business commissioner could be doing for them? So integrating state benefits to preserve these facilities and really thinking holistically about, what is the power of the state to preserve? And that's not what we're hearing right now.
I love that. Those are such important insights. And another related recommendation in the realm of CCLD is that there's a need to increase the quality of data that they collect and that provide. I mean, even what you have all done with your report is filling a gap in data that you would think the state would have collected over the years. How important is this data to being able to move forward with this system?
I would love to do nothing more with government than to put myself out of business as an external consultant. There's certain data, I've worked with state level justice organizations, state level transport organizations, state level small business commission, and this is principally in Australia for a number of years. But in terms of data collection, there's so much more that a regulatory agency or a state or even, a county could potentially capture to really understand their market. And I know that there's been a long trend, especially in the United States, about moving analysts out of government agencies. And there's a heavy reliance on consultants like us. And, there are some agencies that have some really, really good centers of excellence in terms of data analysis. And, that's really commendable. But we need to flow that back into government so that people can make evidence-based decisions and really inform the policy and how they expend funds and how they can improve and innovate. And that's another thing, is we need to talk about integration and innovation and the interface of all these different, everyone has their information in silos. And it's funny, this came up in an LA Times article the other day too. It was actually the Board of Supervisors commenting how it seems like certain agencies within government are siloed. Well, we've been observing this for years, and we need to break down these silos. We need to share data more freely and openly. We need integration of policy discussions. Leila likes to talk a lot about whole person care. I think I'll pitch this off to her, but yeah, we need to talk about whole person care, right, Leila?
Yeah, whole person care. If you have, different agencies serving the same individuals, and who's going to show up today, and how much can operators actually do to support the individuals if they're coming in. Maybe they have a nursing degree, or maybe they, had another business, or maybe they just inherited their mom's house and they open a facility and they did their 40 or 80 hours of training. They need the support of the resources in their community. And I think there's a lot happening through the Department of Healthcare Services right now with CalAIM and enhanced care management that, I don't believe licensed facility owners and operators are in that conversation. I don't believe that CCLD is, looking at that as an opportunity for who they serve, because they're still over to one side. And so it's like the left hand needs to talk to the right hand, or the left brain, right brain. Let's bring it all together.
So that actually brings me to the final recommendation that I pulled, which I think ties a bow on pretty much everything you said. And it relates to the cohort of market facility owners and operators. You make many recommendations that the owners and operators need to come together as one voice to advocate for what they need. We've talked about them being invisible, unseen, unheard, having a seat at the table, being involved in these conversations. And we know from experience that this is really challenging for people who are working 24/7 to keep their facilities open. And, the last thing they can do is head to Sacramento to lobby or spend time talking to their elected official. And so I do want to just touch upon the fact that in LA County, and I think this is a great testament to how the county and the Department of Mental Health saw the need for an association of operators. They call it the LARCA. So let me see if I can get it right. The Los Angeles
Licensed Adult Residential Care Association.
There you go. Okay. And I also credit the Hilton Foundation, I believe, is a major philanthropy that helped to do the seed funding to get this going. And I hope it can stay in existence.
Well, we actually helped NAMI GLEC, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, Greater Los Angeles County, under contract to Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health. We helped them establish LARCA. We sat there from the very first day before the association had a name and helped work collaboratively with a group of community advocates and leaders and stakeholders to hire up the staff and to put the wheels on the car and put the car on the road. So we're really pleased that we got to be involved in that from the very beginning. And yes, we highly encourage people to, especially if you're an owner and operator, to join LARCA and to really, have your voice heard. LA County DMH got the seed funding for LARCA for the first 2 years. And I hear that they're continuing to fund. I heard that LARCA also got a grant from the Hilton Foundation. So definitely a lot of good things happening with Benny Tinson and his, his leadership in that association right now.
That's 10 out of 50 recommendations, 50 plus.
Who's counting?
Who's counting? I have a couple final questions, and I also just want to give you the opportunity, like Carrie, you forgot to bring this up or that up, that is a burning issue for you. The first question I have is, how has this report been received? And where do you see people are actually paying attention? That gives you a little hope.
It's interesting. We've received a lot of positive feedback, especially with the Los Angeles Times reporting, and we're grateful to Jacqueline Cosgrove for doing that article. But, we realize it's a lot to take in. It's a 93,000 plus word report. I believe it's well over 230
I did read
pages.
Every word.
It's a tome. It's a labor intensive read. What we're hoping is that, when people have more time to distill and really, dig into what's important to them, that we'll hear a bit more back. Like I said, for the decision makers that we know that have been made aware of the report, we're aware that either they or their analysts or their aides or their folks are looking at these reports, and we're sure that we're going to be hearing a lot in the near future. Presently, we're engaged in a contract with Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health, and we're assisting them with some project management, some other needs relating to some of the funding that's come through from the state. And we're having a lot of really great conversations like this conversation with you right now.
Yeah, I think it's been very well received, and we're just hoping to be able to build on it. We think that there's additional, research opportunities and opportunity to hone in on how to integrate and, maybe figure out what where these recommendations sit, who's going to champion them. And, that's what we want to support. And I think we also really want to support seeing this research done across the state. Because we think that would be really useful and impactful.
For someone listening to this today, if they feel like they've been inspired or intrigued, is there anything you would suggest people can do to be helpful in this space?
What would be really helpful and what we hear from a lot of especially ARF owners, is that they're really under-resourced. Yes, they are business operators, but at the same time, they're doing really good work to help individuals with significant needs. Consider volunteering. Consider visiting and asking your local ARF operator if you could be of assistance. Support your local ARF operator, with your local city council, and, have them improve their policies and their services to the ARFs in your communities. If you hear about an ARF or RCFE in your local community that might be closing or is experiencing difficulties, get in touch with them and find out, can we get you some sort of support, especially if you know other systems or agencies or nonprofits that support. Try to make connections. If we all do our part to create a web on which we can sustain all of these facilities, then they'll be stronger together. And maybe we can expand them and create additional capacity to serve more vulnerable individuals that need our help.
Well said. Very good.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, I just thank you both for just the care and attention to doing such a thorough research study. It's hard to imagine that it is not going to make an impact. And like I said, everybody needs to reach out to their elected officials, make sure that they share this podcast. If they don't want to read the 93,000 words, they can at least listen to this while they're taking a walk on the beach. And I thank you for being committed in this space. It's so important. And I have hope that your research is going to make a difference.
No, thanks a lot, Carrie.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
We're grateful.
Great to see you both. And I just wish you a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, friends, for joining us on this two-part conversation about the state of licensed residential care facilities in Los Angeles County. If you are listening from another county in California, I would encourage you to share these two episodes and the report with your local officials, because a similar inventory needs to be accomplished throughout the state to protect these beds. The human repercussions associated with closing down these facilities is by no means limited to Los Angeles County. This is a statewide issue, and it will arguably take intentional state intervention to shore up the financing of both facilities and services, to reimagine the role of the community care licensing division in this space, and to possibly spawn a new business model so we can see new entrants into this market in the future. If you are in LA County, may I strongly encourage you to join the Licensed Adult Residential Care Association, LARCA. You can certainly join as a facility operator, and I am happy to report that they have created a new membership category called Friends of LARCA, and that is what we all need to become to lend our voice to protecting these homes. Next time, we will be doing an exploration into occupational science and occupational therapy, and how the fundamental principles associated with that discipline resonates with what I witnessed in the community-based psychosocial model of mental health care in Trieste. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your support, and I am grateful for the technical support of Aaron Stern and the studio at Verdugo Sound. See you next time.